Hello, welcome to another video from alpacaguild.com. Today we're going to be talking about coats, specifically coats for alpacas, young baby cria alpaca right up to adult alpaca. We're going to be talking about when you should be putting these on them, the kind of weather conditions, but also the condition of the alpaca. And we're going to be talking about when maybe to take them off when it gets hot, and talking about the different types that we've got and what they're made of, and even how you can make them yourself. So this video is going to be with Rachel from Purely Alpacas New Zealand. We've done another video with Rachel where we had a look at her fantastic farm, and you'll be able to find a link to that in the details below. But for now, let's talk about alpaca coats. So Rachel, you've brought quite a few coats along here. Fantastic, thank you for that.
Right.
We'll look at each of them in turn to understand when we might use them, etc. So in fact, let's start there with when you might use it. When would you put a coat on an alpaca?
So alpacas obviously have their own insulation with their wool, but there are times where they might need a little bit of help with that. So the main times are often with newborn cria or with an elderly or unwell alpaca who just needs a little bit of help to stay warm. On a beautiful sunny day like this, they don't necessarily require that. But the main weather phenomenon is cold rain and driving wind. With a cold wind, I should say, and that can make them quite cold. So sometimes they'll need a little extra for those older, sick, or very young alpacas. Now, the thing with really young alpacas, little babies, is if you put a coat on them, sometimes mum doesn't recognise them, and it's actually worse than just leaving them without a coat on. And you're better to put them like where there's lots of good shelter. Rather than put a coat on and then mum doesn't want to feed baby or attacks baby or just walks off and leaves it and goes, I don't know who you are, but you're not mine.
So move them into a warmer place rather than try to
Yep.
keep them warm
And
with
that's
a
probably the
coat.
best thing to do in your first instance, but if that's not possible, that's where a coat is a possibility. So when you put one on a cria, always watch to make sure that mum is not afraid of their baby now or is telling it to go away or not feeding.
And you've got a range of different sizes here. Is that because of the size of cria, or are there some times when you'd want to put a coat onto a larger alpaca as well?
So like I said, the sick ones or the older ones might need a coat. So we have some slightly bigger ones here. Most of these are actually dog coats, or I think this one's a minute for a very tiny horse or a very large dog. I'm not really sure. But anyway, I've just acquired them from secondhand shops and stuff over the time. Some of them are waterproof. Waterproof ones are great. These are oilskin on the outside and sheepskin on the inside. So these ones are really good because you know that the oilskin keeps, most of the water off them. And the sheepskin obviously is extra insulation. Yeah.
And obviously you can buy these. There are plenty that can be bought, and over time, no doubt, the manufacturers have worked out the best shapes, best sizes, etc. But if you wanted to make them yourself, is that possible? What materials would you use?
So I'll just wander over here where it's blowing down. This here that John's got is a calf coat or a calf cover. So it's basically a type of tarpaulin, and then they've cut a hole for the head and they've made the shape, and then you could put duct tape to hold it at the front, or you could tie it at the front with a piece of baling twine. Most people have baling twine around, and there's something at the back to hold it round at the back. And this is quite waterproof. This one, calf coats are great, but they're actually too big for cria. This would probably fit a weanling, I guess, a 6-month alpaca, maybe, depending on
And
the
if you had
size
one
of
of
it.
these, you could use it as a template even to
Yeah, so you
produce?
could open this out. If you're really crafty, you could felt some alpaca wool, and once you've made your shape with your tarpaulin, you could felt it out, and then you've got a alpaca wool alpaca cover, which is super warm and lightweight and quite natural.
And the materials here, you say that we've got an oil skin on the outside, so it's quite pliable, so it's going to go around the animal well. Obviously, that's going to keep the water off. And then inside, so this potentially could be alpaca fleece or sheep. Is there a preference to use alpaca when you're alpaca fleece when putting on an alpaca? Is that going to make any difference to the
I don't
animal
know.
itself?
I think if your animal doesn't like a cover, it's not going to like a cover, whether it's made of alpaca or whether it's made of wool or anything else. This one's a bit different. This one's got a little thing, kind of a tail guard, I guess,
Excellent.
and a little thing to guard the neck. So this one, we used, obviously this is too big for a newborn cria. We used it on, we had a heart condition alpaca, and we'd put this on him. But he was really clever at getting out of covers, and so he would always wiggle out of it. And yes, it would end up all in around his legs, and he'd just trot along until we went over and got it off him. But it did help on the really coldest nights because he would just sit there on the ground with this on. And then there's so many different ways that the straps all go and how they held on. So it's really just sort of playing around until you find one that you like using that stays on the alpaca securely without it tangling around their legs. Like I said, we had one fella who's really good at getting it all tangled around himself, but it never really harmed him, and he was pretty calm about it. He'd just be like, oh, it's all tangled around my legs, and he'd just walk along up to us and ask us to take it off.
So the key thing then, if you're putting one of these onto an alpaca, is to keep a close eye on them as well, so they don't get caught up with any fencing, those sort of things.
Definitely.
But if you're at a point when you'd be putting this onto an alpaca, you're probably going to be in an area of your farm where they're going to be easy to manage, easy to monitor, not just wandering around a large area.
Yes, you want to put them on in a pen. Again, you know, your pens and your yards are really important because, again, it allows you to do these kinds of things. When a little baby alpaca is first born, they don't really run too far. So you have little wee tiny, this is
That's
a little dog coat. This one, I've only just recently got it, so I haven't actually tried it on alpaca to make sure it fits well. But yeah, you're putting it on, and you really want to make sure that the little end just before their tail, so if their tail's sitting out here and there's a little bit of their back end, mum is more likely to accept that because she can sniff them.
That's
so
where
when
she
they're
smells
feeding,
to know.
that's where they're sniffing. So I would, something about that size probably fit most newborn cria and still have the little back end and their tail out the back so mum can smell them. And it's really just a little bit of extra warmth. It doesn't need to go all the way around their body. This would be pretty close, but because they cush on the ground, you know, all their tummy and everything's on the ground, and this is more to cover over their back area. Yeah.
And there's particular times that would be really important to do this, such as a sudden change in weather soon after shearing, for example. It might drop to cold, as well as a young alpaca or one that might be ill. But what about overheating? Once you've put this on, should you be looking for signs to say, I need to take that off, they're now getting too hot?
If it gets like this, you don't need it on. You know, it's a beautiful sunny warm day, the sun's got some heat in it. These guys have their natural fleeces keeping them quite warm. If they were, like, let's say, you know, they were newly shorn, they don't have as much of the insulation, but again, they're still quite warm in this weather. Basically, if you see them shivering and it's an animal that needs that extra help, then yes, and then just take it off when it's warm again.
And first thing here this morning, it was 2 degrees. It's up to about 7 at the moment. So, you know, it's it's fairly chilly. Obviously, in some territories, it's going to get a lot colder. At what sort of temperature would we be thinking that we need to be putting these on? I mean, we're talking sort of sub-zero. They should always have them, or can alpaca actually go colder than that first?
So in the Andes and stuff where they live, it does snow, and they you know, if they have a good fleece on them, they're usually pretty okay with that. And like I said, it's that cold wind that can cut right through them. They don't have a lot of blubber as a general, you know, species. They're quite a lean animal, so the cold wind just cuts right through them, and that's where they're most likely to suffer.
Yes.
So definitely, if you can't get them into, or you don't have a lot of shelter, like you might have just planted your trees, or you haven't quite got to building a shelter, just keep in mind these. But most live quite happily out in the open, you know, if they're healthy, not ancient, or super young animals. They're quite good out in all weathers, and they'll be fine.
Fantastic. So we've learned something about the coats. That's really valuable. Thank you. I guess the next thing is getting them onto the animal. Now, these alpaca are relatively tame, as hopefully most people's are. They're happy to eat out of our hand. They generally respect us because we don't interfere with them. Putting a coat on is a different thing altogether. Some alpaca will obviously be more comfortable than others. We've used coats on cria before when they're first born and it's been a bit cold. Relatively easy to catch a cria. They wriggle a little. It's actually quite enjoyable to give them a cuddle if it's not for too long. But what we can look at now perhaps is the ease of getting this one of these coats onto an alpaca. We'll try to put one onto an adult alpaca and one onto our 6-month cria as well. And we'll see how well that goes and whether it makes the cut. Let's do that now.
I'm thinking, I don't know. I guess we'll just get them in a pen and give it a go. Set up the camera and see how many funny things we can have going on. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. It's just like, it's just okay. It's nothing. See? What is it? Jen, have a look. It's just a blanket. Hi. What is it?